they saw that there was a guy who understands nothing about Formula One or anything. What he's just passionate about is about helping others. And a week after they called me and, okay, we have a job for you. Are you interested? The thing is that you have to be in Bahrain in 3 days. That's your first day.
In this episode, you'll get to know Pyry Salmela, the Formula One performance coach. And you'll hear the story of how he went from playing ice hockey in Finland to becoming a performance coach and trainer of the world's top motorsports drivers, including Pierre and Daniel Ricciardo. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is my Success Show. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Show. This is where I speak to some of the most successful people I've met in my life's journey, and I'm on a mission to find universal principles of success. I want to find them to help my family succeed and to help you succeed. In case it's your first time here, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions of people how to be successful through my online courses. With this show, I wanted to create something lasting, sort of a legacy project to help my family succeed, and I thought you'd enjoy learning along with them. I interview people who have multifaceted success, not just financial or career success, but success in many areas of their life so that they're happy and they're well-rounded. And I do that because I want to help you have that kind of well-rounded success. Before I begin, if you know someone that you think would make a great guest for the show, someone you admire, please email your suggestion to guest@davecrenshaw.com. The other thing I'd like to ask you to do is during this episode, I want you to look for something you can do. Your goal in listening to this should be to take action. Find something you can do to make my guest success story a part of your success story. I'll help you out with that too as we go along, especially at the end. I'll summarize a few action steps that you can take from my guest's story. And my guest today, I admit I'm a little bit of a fanboy about what's going on here. I'm into Formula One. I'm into motorsports. And so the fact that I get one of the world's top performance coaches to Formula One drivers is absolutely amazing to me. I think you're really going to enjoy my conversation with today's guest. Pyry Salmela is a Formula One performance coach with over a decade of experience. He joined Formula One in 2014, where he's currently coaching Daniel Ricciardo for the Visa Cash App RB Formula One team. That's Red Bull's second team. His background as an ice hockey athlete and fitness trainer has given him a unique perspective in the motorsports industry. Pyry was born and raised in Finland, and he enjoys traveling across the world with his fiancée. Pyry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be on this podcast, and thanks for the kind words and the invitation. And I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, and I'm especially grateful too because I know how demanding that schedule is. Where are you located right now?
Currently, I'm in my hometown, Dubai, but I just came from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, from our previous race, and I'm getting ready for my next travels to Australia in Melbourne. And now we are fully into the F1 season, and there's a lot of travel days, but been there quite a while already, so I know what's coming for it. So
as I think about the time demands and the travel and the many different locations you have to go to, for me, someone who works from home, that seems very tremendous to have to deal with all of that.
I think what I see is like when you build a plan for yourself, how you want to plan your day, your routine. And a lot of us is functioning pretty well when we have a plan and we have a routine to repeat. I think where many people fall off is when they fall out from the routine. And for many people, it means when they start traveling. It took time for me to get used to for the lifestyle that you're consistently packing, unpacking, finding your routines in a foreign place, which is not yours. And that definitely took quite a while for me to get on top of my game on that.
So I want to come back to that a little bit later. I want to talk about how you manage that and your techniques for that. I want to start with you in the place where I start with every guest, which is, where were you when you were a teenager? Before the career began, what did you think you were going to be doing in the future with your career?
But the funny thing is that I certainly didn't plan to be where I'm today. So I was born and raised in Finland. I was a striving ice hockey player who wanted to make into the NHL. And the ice hockey was for me something that I was living and breathing. And that's where I thought that's my destination will be, also the end destination. But despite I made to a level where I did it as a full-time job, I still did not receive the level that I was looking for.
How did you know you hadn't reached that level? What told you that said, wait, maybe this isn't going to work out the way that I thought?
You come to those crucial years where you have the draft year and you see your peers, what is the next step. And when you feel like there's this next step, and then you take 2 steps back, and then you take the next step back. And that's where I started realizing that despite I was moving forward, I was also moving too often backwards. And then you go through injuries, and you always, every year, you seeking which team I'm going to sign in. Is it 2-year contract? Is it 1-year contract? And I start feeling like I'm in this trap that it's just not moving to the direction that I wanted to. And I think this was also naturally the time for me where I started thinking about the after career. I started studying, or in my latter stage of my hockey career, and I kind of had a feeling what I was coming for, because I was always so into for the human performance factor. And I think where the inspiration came from is that, like, because I thought I had pretty good skills, and yet I still didn't made it to the top. So there was a sort of inspiration personally where I wanted to understand why I didn't make it. What was the reason? And how could I translate it to other people that they wouldn't do the same mistakes? I always say I wasn't the smartest athlete. And I truly believe that's also true. If I learn from my own mistakes, if I get more knowledge base, maybe I can help someone else to be smarter than I was.
Yeah, right there, there are a couple of things that I really want to highlight, because your career is in coaching. And as a coach, either both in performance and entrepreneurship, our job is to see others get amazing results. And at an early age, I can already see that you were demonstrating a couple of the traits required for a great coach. One is introspection, where you're always evaluating how well you're doing. And then the second one is, how can I relate this to someone else? How can I teach someone else with this? So as you started to think that way, did you think, you know what, maybe coaching is for me? Or were you not quite to that point yet when you were, in your late teens, early 20s?
In the teens, I was already super curious. I was always thinking why I am who I am. And I was also thinking why someone else is who they are, why the high performance made it and why I didn't make it. So there was a lot of this understanding and this curiosity, like why we are who we are, psychologically, physically, and what are the key traits on high performance that I could learn and probably translate to a future clients. And I started coaching already, like while I was still playing. I did my first few assistant coach roles already at 15 years old. So when I was preparing for my season, I was already participating on camps that I could learn from others, like how they are doing. And I just always had this curiosity on learning and coaching and leading.
There's a word that is used a lot of different ways in different careers, and you're using it right here, which is performance. And I think in professional context at work, someone is thinking, oh, performance, maybe in sales, how many sales I get, or how the company is doing. How do you define performance? Is it just about physical fitness, or is it something more to you?
No, not at all. I always say, like, when we talk about my specialty, but top performer is so much more than a physical performance. It's about holistic performance on human performance, which encounters so many different elements, which are somewhat task specific. You personally have task specific skills that makes you perform top in your own field.
So let's continue your story here for a moment. When did you start developing your career in performance coaching? Was that something that you were studying for? Was that something that a mentor was helping you with? Where did you first get your foot in the door for performance coaching?
So while I was playing since I was 6 years old in ice hockey, I was also working out in the gym at very early age. And my father pushed me into weightlifting. And that's obviously something that was very much where you were comparing your result by 1 kilo, 1 kilo. And that's where you started seeing how logical is that the physical effort you're going to put in, what you're going to get out. And that's where I kind of learned the discipline that your own effort equals outcome. And that also means that overdoing things will cost you more than it gives. So I got into the human performance world at very early age, seeing examples on how you can really maximize human potential on certain areas of physical performance. But then I started studying, or I went to the sports college in Finland while I was playing. So this helped me understanding that I could incorporate both ice hockey and the school. And then my early 20s, I went to general sports instructor school where I got the first educational specific course that I did for sports coaching. And that gave me the route to actually for this performance coaching. And then later on my age, I applied for university and I did 4 years in university and so forth, plus all the courses. So I think always been also very curious that it's not only experience based, but it's also knowledge based that comes through educational paths.
Was there a mentor who helped you during those years? Someone that you look back on and say, wow, they really had a huge impact, and the approach that I take to coaching, there's something maybe I think about all the time that they told me. Could you relate a story about a mentor you worked with?
I think I had few of them, and I think the first one was my father. My father used to be an Olympian in speed skating, and I was hating him the way he was bragging about himself, how good he was at young age compared to me. This was for me something, and this was a clear driver for me. So I said, like, screw you, father. I'm going to show you one day I'm going to be as good. But then I had multiple good mentors, and I never said that I never invented my own wheel. It's a product that I've learned from plenty of people that has helped me in the career. Starting from the weightlifting gym where I had Olympians teaching me how to lift weights. Then I have had performance coaches in Formula One. I have professors that help me plan those foundational skills in physiology and biology and so forth. It's not only about having had a mentor, but the hours and hours that I've dedicated to on understanding not only in performance, but all in aspects in life. I think this has always been the strength of mine, that I've always been so curious about everything in life.
So as a coach, I've learned the importance of having a philosophy, a perspective from which you come. And I don't believe there's one right philosophy, but I do think it's critical to have one. So what is the core of your philosophy in coaching? When you approach working with someone like a Formula driver, like Daniel Ricciardo, what's the mindset that you have coming into it that's going to help someone succeed?
I'm a very simple person, and that's why, therefore, so is my philosophy. And it starts always from what are we targeting? So what is our end goal? And then we start looking the next step. How do we get there? We start meaning that, okay, we need to break down the picture. What are our strengths, our weaknesses? And then we start building the plan after. So this is the how. And then the last question is based on what?
What does that mean?
It means that, like, okay, is there evidence that our strategy is going to work? If we don't have the evidence, research evidence, do we have experienced evidence? While we're building this plan and this strategy, do we actually know, does it work? And can we justify our actions? Because what I always think, there's so many different roads to Rome, And there's so many great application solutions, technology that we have available. But I think we are so much more limited about the time. So I think it comes down to this nitty picking that actually what is important. Are we focusing our time on the 99th most important thing? Or is our plan actually following the linear? What is the most important thing that we get there? What is the second most important? What is the third?
And I'm assuming if the evidence starts to look not what we hoped, not what we expected, then you're going to make adjustments to the how and the process that you're using.
Because then you also have the time variability. If we see a weakness, which we want to improve, but if we know that we have only a limited time, and then we have to evaluate, will it pay back the time we're going to invest? And is that going to take time away from what is actually even more important? So I think it's a very logical framework.
Yeah, no, I like it. And I love that you're saying that it's simple, because I believe that it's easier to execute on something simple than something that's very complex, lots of steps, especially in the world of Formula One, where there are so many different inputs happening in a very, very brief amount of time. It has to be simple or it's not going to be very usable, is it?
And it's going to lack efficiency, because when you have a plan, and when that plan creates autonomy, that's where you peak the efficiency.
Okay, let's return to your story for just a moment. When you first began performance coaching, I'm assuming there was another group of people that you specialized in, or who were your first clients as a performance coach?
My first clients were ice hockey players, both youth and development athletes. And I always felt that this was the easiest for me because I could understand what an athlete mindset is. I think the second step, where I went into the general population, I understood that this field is actually very different. Our goals are very different, even though there are similarities. But coaching an athlete compared to someone that has, for example, aesthetics drives for exercising, it's a very different world.
Okay, so you were coaching ice hockey players, and where did this pathway start where you started to get your foot in the door with professional racing? Because that seems very, very different to me than ice hockey.
That is a very different, and it was something that I never planned, and I was never even seeking. So everything till that point was quite logical. I saw it coming, and this came by a total coincidence. It was one Thursday evening. I was in my car coming back from work, and I got a text message. An old friend of mine who was working in motorsport texted me, "A gentleman called Aki Hintsa knows about you, and he's interested on hearing more about you because he has a possible job for you. Are you interested on getting into an interview?" And I called him and I said, "Okay, what is this about?" He said, "I don't know. Just reach out to him and he will tell more." I reached out to him and he asked, "Yes, I know about you. Could you come to Helsinki and meet me for an hour?" I did it. And after the talk, we had a talk for 2 hours where we didn't speak for one word about Formula One. And I always say after the interview and that whatever that was, I'm never going to get the job because I was way too honest.
What does that mean? In what ways were you way too honest?
I had no filter. Like I said, I always say why I got the job was not because I was more experienced, why I was more, advanced compared to other coaches, or I was more experienced. No, it was purely because I think they saw that there was a guy who understands nothing about Formula One, and it's almost this young, naive mindset that don't care about the glam or anything. What he's just passionate about is about helping others and working with the people that is willing and to do the next step. So I think that what they saw in me, that they can, develop me, they can mold me. And, a week after they call me and, okay, we have a job for you. Are you interested? The thing is that you have to be in Bahrain in 3 days. That's your first day. I didn't see it coming because I had already other plans. But I said, why not? We live only once, and I always wanted to live the life in a fast lane in a way. And 3 days after, I was in Bahrain, and that's where it all started. And the whole life changed in 2 weeks.
Were you starting in Formula One? Were you starting at like Formula Two or something like that?
I went straight to the deep end to Formula One, which I would say that never suggest to anyone. Because when I started, I can literally say I didn't feel like I knew anything about it. The luck what I had is that I had a very talented driver, but the thing is that his physical qualities were very raw.
Who was your first driver? Are you able to say that?
I had the Red Bull driver called Daniel Kvyat. He was my first driver, and he was 18. He was about to start his first year in Formula One. And I was thinking when I was in Bahrain, so how on earth I can help this kid because I have no clue about the sport. The luck being on my side is that he was so raw in his athletic qualities that there was so much to do from a basic physiological development perspective that gave me the time to just focus on those key pillars on physical development. The last pillar you enter a lot later, where you start really focusing on task-specific skill sets and qualities from a performance perspective.
So you used a word, and I think it's important to highlight for someone who is listening to this and they're saying, I want to have the kind of success that Pyry has had, and the word is luck. And luck certainly factors into things. But I think that just chalking it up to luck sells your story short. You prepared. You went to school. You were working with clients, and you were building a reputation, which without that reputation, the luck would have never occurred. Could you just kind of expand on your thoughts about that?
Yes, I have to agree with you that there's definitely the luck momentum where I thought about, but I always had the feeling that I will get lucky because how intentional I was since I was young. Like after school, after my own training, what I was doing, I was spending my time on a sport institute, looking at the other people, how do they prepare differently compared to myself? So I was surrounded by this stimuli that was coming all over because I was living and breathing the sport and understanding the different fields. And so I was very intentional since I was very young. And I had a feeling that at some point, the luck is going to knock my door when I just keep showing up.
Where did that come from? Was that from you internally, or was it the way that your parents talked to you? What did you do to create that feeling?
It's difficult to say because I have to say I had this naive belief on myself. I somehow felt different compared to other kids because I have this huge drive on succeeding. And I always felt that like one day I'm going to make it. So I always had that naive belief on myself. But I was lacking self-confidence. I was a little bit shy. And I felt like I wish I had the courage to express what I have in my side because the fire is incredible. And I was very poor at selling my own self. I was very poor at giving a price tag. So then I knew I would start from adding value. This was a key point for me. I always just tried to get my foot in the door and start adding value. And people would, after all, they will see that when I just keep adding value, someone will notice it sooner than later.
Yeah, I love that phrase, adding value. I've found that to be true where I've made my goal, and I've seen many people do this, made their goal to give more than they're receiving. And I think that when a lot of people, when they think about their job, they go, I'm going to do just what I need to do to get paid. And that's the mindset that gets you stuck in the same spot over and over and over. But if you say, I'm going to do more than what I'm getting paid for, I'm going to deliver more value than I've got, that I think is what opens up the door to luck. And it sounds like you agree with that perspective.
I have to say, I didn't grow up in money, so I didn't even understand about money. What I was just passionate about was adding value. I just had this huge fire on myself. on helping people and understanding what makes Michael Jordan, and then trying to replicate it and transfer those skills to a new athlete.
So let's return back to that story. You started coaching immediately. Did you feel like you struggled early with it? Did you feel that you were adequately prepared, or was it natural? And the reason why I ask is because as an entrepreneur, a lot of times where I've had success is I sold myself into a situation, meaning I got people to agree that I'm going to provide something for them. And then I was like, now I need to figure out how to provide this. The moment that I put myself in forces me to be prepared and do better. Where do you feel you fit on that spectrum of your early experience with coaching?
I do have a good example to give you. Like, I was giving a presentation and there was a colleague of mine who was telling his story, and he said, before I took this opportunity, I went through a very logical framework on was I ready for it? And I said to him, like, amazing. When I took the job, I didn't think for 1 minute. I just went for it. And then I will figure out the damages that I actually done. So I always have had this kind of moving forward, and I will figure it out. It sounds wrong, but like I was still saying to myself, fake it till you make it. I was saying many times, I have no clue what I should do, but I'm going to figure it out. It hurts, but I'm going to figure it out.
Clearly you deliver, because the world of Formula One, and for those who are not familiar, it's a revolving door. There are constantly driver transitions, constant team transitions, constant new sponsors. All of this, it's very chaotic from my perspective. And yet you have remained in the midst of all that chaos. So clearly you're doing something right that says, well, we have to keep Pyry on the team no matter what happens.
So I would also say that very early on, I realized that I got lucky. But the luck usually doesn't sustain if you don't actually deserve it. And I realized that now I got a golden opportunity, but I need to earn the respect. And earning that respect means that you go through the deep end, you figure it out, you work hard on yourself, that you develop the skill, and you show evolution. And I'm just a big believer on that you earn your respect. The respect is not given, it's earned.
You just used a great phrase, which is show evolution. Can you expand a little bit on what you mean by that?
When you are young, you think you know a lot more than you do. And it's actually a scary place because you don't know what you don't know. So having the awareness that I don't know everything, but I have the will to learn, and I can show that like, despite I'm not good at everything, I can show progress. And even on things where I think I know everything, when someone brings a different viewpoint and you are still able to change your mindset and evolve with the more information you have, because after all, we make our decisions based on the information we have, which means that it's likely that we are not always right.
That's a great perspective. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that's what people want to see of their coworkers, the people that they lead, the people they manage, even family members. We want to see that someone is growing. We don't necessarily expect perfection, but if you can demonstrate that evolution, that's a huge thing.
I think you see in the work environment, I always even know more when you see the hungry individual who is showing the humility, the willingness to learn, and showing that while they're willing to learn, they're also showing the progress, that actually that's what you thought, I took on board and I'm evolving, and creating this own ownership on their own thought process. So I think this you really value on the work environments where you show that independent decision making based on the information that you learn from others.
Okay, so let's return to your story again. And I'm going to call back to what you were saying about based on what, right? The evidence, the proof that it's working. What was the first moment where you look back, because Formula One is all evidence-based, right? You won or you didn't. What was the first moment where you felt, I made an impact? What just happened? That victory, I feel like I had a hand in that. I know I'm talking about this from it. I know you're a humble guy, but yet you can also recognize, wow, I trained this driver to do something that they didn't do before. Did you have a moment like that where you felt like, okay, I belong here?
I think that was the time also at this very early stage on where I really didn't know everything, where I thought about like, okay, now I made amazing off-season preparation, and now they are hitting new PRs, they are developing as an athlete, and I thought that that's the result because of good results on track. But that was also the time where I didn't know what I didn't know, and it was almost the other way around, that I started learning about the Formula One, that it's so complicated. It's so complex, where the physical performance, the driver, is just one big piece of the puzzle, but not all. So I think those were the enlightening moments that you understood that, like, yes, I can see the progress on the athlete. I can see that they are developing skills, what they didn't have, how it's going to impact the end result. And that's where I started realizing that, okay, this Formula One is actually a lot more complicated than I thought. But that also keeps you very much grounded. That despite you see your athlete growing as an adult, growing as an athlete, having a new skill sets in the sport, but also outside the sport, those are the moments where you really feel rewarding, that, okay, after all, we are the teachers for the young kids or the young athletes, and that's where you feel immense reward when you see them growing. However, the sport is so much more. The car and the 1,000 people that is working on those two cars keeps you quite grounded on that. Despite you doing your job, it doesn't mean that that's all down to you.
So in a situation like that, where there are so many variables, right? Massive team, hundreds of people, the car is a factor, the track is a factor, the weather's, all these different things. How do you measure your success as a performance coach? How can you say objectively that what you did is having an impact on the outcome?
I think this has been a big struggle over the years, because it's such a skill and task specific sport with so many elements on it, that I really struggled on really quantifying my own input. But at the same time, you go again back to the first questions. What are we looking for? And then you start looking for, are we getting closer where we are supposed to go? What part of is mine and what is not? Is that important? I don't think so. Because in the end, I'm there for the athlete, not for myself. So if we are moving towards what is the target and the goal, I think that's after all the most important thing. It's not about me, it's about the athlete itself. Obviously, there is KPIs where you see that, like, there's some markers, reports where you try to have objective and subjective measures where you think about, like, okay,
For those who are not familiar, what is a KPI and what are some of your KPIs with the driver?
It's a key performance indicator. So it can be as easy as, let's say, how high you jump, and you measure your jump height over time, where you see your evolution. That's an easy example of KPIs.
For a Formula One driver, though, what are those KPIs?
That's, I think, what is one of the most difficult thing to actually set objective, where you can say, okay, now for the Formula One driver, this is a very relevant KPI. So then you are rather having KPIs which are external and not internal, because those KPIs have so many variables that they become very unreliable. So then it's really a physiological markers, which can be a test results. It can be autonomic nervous system data, longitudinal sleep tracking, whatever you use it in your training to measure your own performance. So it's more like those external KPIs rather than internal, because in the internal, it's difficult to set one internal KPI because there's too many variables, which makes it very unreliable.
You mentioned sleep, which I imagine is a huge factor in what's going on. Let's dig into this just a little bit. What is a training week like with you and one of the drivers? Like let's say Daniel. How many times do you meet? How many hours are you spending each time? What are you doing? Can you just kind of paint a picture of what the day in a life is of a performance coach for F1?
Yes, I think every single driver has their own driver performance coach. But I also think there's almost 20 different roles. When I started the job, I was a 24/7 performance assistant for my athlete, where I spend the morning till the evening with the driver. So it varies a lot between the drivers. For example, now I'm with the Daniel, where Daniel is already a lot more experienced athlete, which needs a lot less one-to-one time because he's been in the game for very long. And for us, it's mostly a distance coaching when it comes to outside of track training activity. It's more like consultation. As then, if I compare my previous ones, for example, for Pierre, we spend about 300 days together from morning till evening. So the framework looks very different. How a week look like, that also varies because we think that we have 24 races in the calendar, but there is 25 simulator days, there's 30 marketing days, and so much more, as well as there's also the personal life. So there's a lot going on also outside of the track. So your whole schedule pretty much tells how much time we have. And then you try to play between the recovery time and the development time. That's the juggle. I always say that getting fit in Formula One, I think, is doable because it's just following a logical framework and path. What it makes difficult is the lifestyle of an F1 driver because it's so chaotic.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that a little bit. First, let's paint a picture of the chaos that is a Formula One driver. And then the more important thing with you, me speaking to you, is what do you do? What do you say to them to help them manage that so that it doesn't become physically and mentally fatiguing?
I would start from the framework. Again, it's like I think so much time we're paying attention on optimizing everything, but the real life world in Formula One is non-optimal. So I always approach the coaching philosophy on building resilience because let's say now we came from Saudi. Daniel flew back to London from simulator. The day after, he flew to Australia. Then he's having number of marketing activities before the Grand Prix in Australia. So it's far from being ideal. And this same pattern repeats itself so often that the preparation between optimal is far from being optimal. And therefore, having the resilience psychologically and physiologically is so important.
How do you arm them with that resilience? What does that mean in the context of Formula One? What practices do I need to have to be resilient?
The resilience, let's say psychologically, you already know is that you build that framework for them, that they know what they are supposed to do, and repeating. Building resilience is applying, breaking, regenerating, breaking. So it's this kind of cycle where you create this toughness on just repeating similar activities and being able to go through when it doesn't feel always good.
And regardless of where they are, right? Even if they're on the road, they repeat those same activities.
Yes, because after all, they have so many stakeholders that are expecting them to perform at the highest level. You have 330 days when someone is expecting something from you, and it's no way that they always feel optimal.
As a time management guy, I feel overwhelmed just thinking about that. When you're not on the road, it's easy to have a regimen. It's easy to say, I wake up at this time, I exercise at this time. I mean, that's how I operate. So I can see this difficult balance that you must have to help them achieve, which is the regimen, but also the flexibility. how many hours a day, when all of this other stuff is going on, how many hours a day does a driver have to devote to physical fitness or doing things that promote their wellness? Is it an hour a day? Is it 2 hours a day? Like, and how do you help them manage that?
I think that also varies a lot because, when you have preseason, the drivers can train up to 20 hours a week. But when we come to in season and the competitive season, it suddenly goes down at half. And then you have between 5 and 15, and we are probably somewhere in the middle, 10 hours a week that they have the time and, even the trainability, because that it's no pointless to push over the limit when the body is not ready to receive the stimulus. There's always this battle of playing with what is optimal and what is the development work and what is, let's say, when we gather sleep data from after the weekend and then we still have to go for a session on Monday or Tuesday, we know that the body is not ready yet. The battery is not 100%, and we got to go through it.
I want to ask one question specific to that, which is the sleep data. What is your belief, or what have you seen is necessary for the right amount of sleep for a Formula One driver?
I've seen quite a big variety on the way they sleep, and some of them functions in my eye extremely well with 6, and you still know that that's not an optimal amount, as we know that if I had the 6 hours sleep, which I have often, I feel suboptimal. And yet I've seen other examples that feels like they just can go, and despite the time zone changes, they just be able to repeat this 9 hours of great sleep. So I've seen such a huge variety on that. And what I always say is that individually you cannot look fully on the daily number. You gotta look at the trends.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a huge factor in productivity and performance, and I think it doesn't get talked about enough. I know personally I require 9.
I think there is always the difference is like, I think the harder your life is, the more demand there is. There's also the more demand for self-care. And I think that's where the balance always fall out, is that when things get tough, we also fall out on that self-care. Whereas when the harder the physical stress on the body, the more you need to recover. And that's not usually the balance that we see.
That is so true. I wrote a book, Pierre, called The Power of Having Fun. And I talk about how it's mandatory. It is something that we need to schedule in our life. In addition to the sleep and all of the exercise, we have to have that self-care. And yes, I love that. The higher demand, the higher the need for self-care. What a great statement.
And I think that's always the first one to fall out. Like when things get tough, when it gets stressful, that's where we start eating bad, sleeping bad, and just feeling bad. As it should be the other way around. The harder it gets, the more self-care we need.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to bring up a question I had about your personal life. You were recently engaged. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So it brings up a couple of questions. With such a demanding schedule, how were you able to carve out time to build that relationship, and how do you continue to make time for that relationship?
I always had the rule on me that I really want to separate my private life and work life. So I always was thinking that I never want anyone that knows that world, because when I come home, I want to be in a world where my partner doesn't talk about my work or doesn't know about it so much. After all, that's the place where I met my fiance. And then I realized that actually she understands me. And this is such a relief, because I always had the struggle that if I ever met someone, that I felt like they could never relate and fully understand why I'm not at my peak when I come from travels, why I need a little bit time to recover, why I see the challenges on keeping the relationship because of the limited time I have and the very unstable life I have. then soon I realized that actually it was great to have someone that actually understands the world. And yet it's still always a juggle. She doesn't work in Formula One anymore, but she's been working there and she knows exactly how it is. And that's been a like amazing support for me, that I don't need to feel always bad when I come home and I have no energy. It's rather being that someone having understanding and giving you the energy and support, and that I have time to, recover myself, but also actually what I always value is the time then outside of the work. And this is something what I learned over the years, is how important for me is to separate those two worlds.
From a systemic perspective, how do you carve out that time? We've talked about the demands and all the different things that need to take place with Formula One. So how do you say, here is time and I'm going to protect that time? I'm not going to let other things get in the way. From a practical standpoint, how is that accomplished?
So for the most part, and for the most part of my life, I have failed massively, because the internal drive and the fire that I have had to make it no matter what, and I still feel like I haven't made it. So the fire that is inside has always, I saw it that I don't care how much I have time, I'm just willing to sacrifice over and over and over time to get to the next stage. I think having Chiara in my life has brought for me the contrast on understanding what actually can be also very important and even more important than the work and the success. And I think she's been the biggest impact on my life, on bringing that contrast and the understanding for my own blind spots, that it's not all about work. And in the end, like one day when you're in a deathbed, you don't think about your bank account or your what you think about is the people that you have spent time with.
And so do you have a specific date that you have each week, or do you look ahead on the schedule at the beginning of the week and say, here's the time that we can reconnect?
We do that actually. When I'm back from travels, we always try at least once a week to do a date night. And I think we have been pretty adamant on having that time together. But also with the partner I have, it's almost also comes also naturally, because I also look the place for myself where I feel like I'm relaxing. It's almost like this vacuum cleaner that I start pulling towards, because I feel like that's the place where I recharging my battery.
Oh, that's great. Talk to me about the future. What do you see ahead in the next few years? I saw that you have an app that you're working on. Is that correct?
Yes, that is a work in progress, which I've been working for over a year now, and I always also been in my career quite strategic, and I knew that the Formula One won't be for the rest of my life. And there's skill sets that I would like to learn which are outside of Formula One, and that's why I took this app project on my own as my personal development project, to develop skills, but again, even more importantly, give for the people that I didn't have a chance to do it before. Because I've got so many times I've got reach out where people are asking like, could you help me on this? Could you have advices? And I always felt so bad that I just didn't have the time what it requires to really build a system. So I wanted to create a platform where it's accessible for a very low price and can get into my coaching system, which I believe can provide life happiness, better performance. Because I'm not particularly a big fan of the current fitness trend and the mentality that seems to be where it's very aesthetically driven. Because I feel like working inside out is probably even better. Like finding a purpose that improves your life quality is something way more valuable than your biggest quotes or something like that. I wanted to bring something that comes from my heart and brings my system into people's approachable for people to join into the moment. And I can't wait it to be out. It will take probably some months, but it's work in progress and it's coming nicely together. I'm super excited.
Where is the best? We're going to wrap up here in a second with some action items, but before I do that, where is the best place for people who want to follow you? They want to stay up to date with what you're doing with the app. Where would you like people to go to stay connected with you?
I'm probably the most active on Instagram. I could still be even more active. My handle is pyry.salmela and my app is called pyry.app.
And for those who are not familiar with Finnish or pronunciation, that's Pyry Salmela. Yeah.
That is correct. Pyry.
Thank you for your patience with me as I'm doing my best with that.
You're doing an amazing job so far.
All right. So here's the point in the interview. And by the way, I feel like we could, and I honestly feel like I should go on talking to you about this for quite a while, but I know your time is very limited. So what I'm going to do now is I do this with every guest where we summarize possible action items because, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, it's not just about hearing. It's not just about learning. It's about doing. It's about putting it into practical application. So what I want to do is suggest action items that someone listening to this, regardless of their job, could implement this week, something small that they could do. So I'm going to suggest 3, and then I'd love, Pierre, for you to suggest 1 as well. My gosh, there's so much here in this interview. The first one I'm going to start with is that concept of when you're helping someone perform, when you're helping a driver improve, you look at the what, which is the end goal, the how, and then the based on what, the evidence. I'm going to focus, first of all, on the based on what, the measurement. Too often we set goals and we are not properly measuring them. We're not saying, here's how I know I'm moving toward that goal. So I'd invite someone who's listening to this, whether you're trying to lose weight or get a promotion or increase your savings, define how you're going to measure your progress on that and then start tracking that measurement over time. And that's going to help you know whether or not you have to make adjustments to what you're doing. The other one that I want to highlight is that concept of adding value, how you recognize that you had this lucky moment. You created the lucky moment through your preparation, but you had this lucky moment with Formula One. And then you said, I'm going to hold on to this. I'm going to maximize this. And the way that I'm going to do this is by adding value. And I would encourage anyone listening to this to ask the question, how am I adding value to my job? How am I adding value to this opportunity that I have? Not how can I do what's expected of me? That's not enough. It's how can I do just a little bit more than what's expected of me? And that's what's going to help you maximize the value of these opportunities. That's what I did with LinkedIn Learning. That's what I try to do with my books. That's what I'm trying to do with these interviews, is to add value, give more than expected. And then the last one is I'm going to highlight that phrase: the higher the demand, the higher the need for self-care. So with whatever it is that you're pursuing in life right now, you always need to carve out time to take care of yourself. That's physical fitness. That's getting the sleep that you need. That's making time to have fun. So ask yourself, am I giving myself enough self-care? And if not, where can I schedule some time to provide more of that for myself and make that a priority in your week? All right, those are just 3 that I focused on. Pierre, what would you add to that?
I would add putting a focus on your environment. We often talk about the motivation, how important is the internal motivation. And I say that whereas it's important, but often overtalked, because that's only the initial spark. It's the consistency what gets you things done, not the motivation, the first spark that you got. So creating an environment that is boosting those positive behaviors that makes you in a good mood. That's how I always create the framework on how I make my day. And this is a lot about how you create your environment. So what are the steps that makes you in a good mood? And that's a lot about boosting your environment.
I love it. Yeah, anyone can take a moment and consider their environment.
And just think about your fridge. If you only see the healthy stuff, you're likely going to stick with the healthy stuff. If you walk by your fridge and there's always those junk foods, sooner or later you're going to grab on one of them. And that's why the environment is such a powerful tool.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And we all can take a moment and consider if the environment is contributing to what we want to achieve. Pyry, thank you so much for your generosity of this. I know that it's a demanding schedule right now in the middle of the season. So I'm absolutely grateful that you took the time to do this.
Thanks to you. It's been a pleasure, and I hope there was some valuable thoughts on that the listeners can learn from.
Yes. And thank you, everyone, for being here and listening. Remember, it's not so much about what you heard or the knowledge you gained. It's about the action that you take. So do one thing based on this interview, and you'll make Pyry's success story a part of your success story. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Show, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bedez. Sound editing by Nick Wright. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 Licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you like to get your podcasts. If you have a suggestion for someone my dad might like to interview, please send it to guests@davecrenshaw.com. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time!